So you're in for a treat today. My next guest is probably, I've called him my spirit animal before, and I want to make him blush that he's my hero. I've spent a long time when I first got sober, 30 some odd years ago. I didn't really have role models of who I wanted to be in the world. So George Strait and I read a lot of Tom Clancy novels, so I used his characters to be my role model of who I wanted to be as a man once I got sober and into the world. And as I've grown and gone through so many changes, I've looked for people who I could emulate, who I could. My friend Todd Herman wrote a book called The Alter Ego Effect, and it's about like seeing what's in the world and what do you want to take on for yourself. And I met my next guest just because I saw some of his speaking advertisements. I asked him to be on the podcast because I loved him, and we were talking through the pandemic and what people were going through. Since then, I wait for what he posts every single day. It's so embarrassing to be such a fanboy, but for me, finding a man who is so open hearted, right? Who is so caring, but also really strong and powerful in what he's building in his life and how he raises and his family and interacts, with his wife and how he is in the world. That combination is very, very rare. And so Brett Culp, who is my next guest, is an acclaimed filmmaker, a social entrepreneur whose work has inspired audiences around the world. He is the personal cinematographer for Hollywood stars, music icons, beloved authors, etc., and so forth. Royal families included. His films, Look to the Sky, A Voice That Carries, and Legends of the Night are on Netflix and Apple TV and Amazon Prime, so you can go see these. He's an international speaker, and he's here on our podcast. Brett, thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks for inviting me, and thanks for that introduction. Can I take you with me everywhere I go and let you introduce me that way?
I would carry your suitcase just for a little while because again, I see a lot of strong guys out there, right? Speaking just powerfully, values this, that, and everything. And I see a lot of really kind, sweet people, and I rarely see people who kind of have grown up and become powerful, strong men, the kind that I want to see in society. And for
Mhm.
me, coming from such a negative, kind of negative on the scale of functional to,
Yeah.
raising my own family and becoming the kind of person who people look up to, that is really inspiring to me. What does it feel like for you to have someone like me just gush, kind of disgustingly all over you? How do you allow that in?
I absolutely feel in my life that my life is bigger than me and who I am is bigger than me. And it is a combination of course, the influences of my life, my mom, my dad, my family, the heroes I've had that shine through me. But, being a very spiritual person, I feel that everything I do, I'm just sort of the vehicle for that thing. I am the bulb, not the light. And so, as the bulb, it's my job to show up and be clear, to be available, to be present. But I know that the light that shines through me is bigger than me. It's more than me. It is God in me, it is the universe in me. And so my goal is to keep the whatever the connection is, the connection clear, keep it clean, so that that energy can flow smoothly and easily, and so that I can shine the way I was created to shine when the energy shows up to shine. And that is for me an empowering positioning, because it keeps me from feeling all the pressure to generate all the energy, because that's hard to do some days.
Mm.
There are days when I am going to speak to 2,000 people and I'm not having the best day. And, it is, I've given hundreds and hundreds of speeches, and my goal is for the audience not to know what mood I'm in or what kind of day I've
Yeah.
had, because what I'm sharing is not about me. It's bigger than me. It's more than me. And so it takes the pressure off me when I win and when I fail, and that's a good thing.
How do you keep the pipe clean to that source?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a lot of it is about inputs. The world around us would like to dictate the information that goes into our brains and into our hearts. It is in their vested interest to control our behaviors and our thoughts and our actions, to get them to do what we want, to spend our money, to use our votes, to whatever, in certain ways, to guide our behaviors, sometimes for better, but sometimes for worse. And
And mostly for
I,
profit.
yes, yes, profit or control or political gain or power, or you're right, whatever it is. Very often it's for the interest of the person that's trying to control and manipulate, not for us or for our families or our communities, really. And so to me, it's about saying, well, I'm going to take control of those inputs, and I am going to decide what goes in and what comes into me. Zig Ziglar, who was a Christian person, famous, one of the most famous motivational speakers ever, said, every morning I wake up and I read my Bible and I read the newspaper, and then I know how both sides are doing. And I like the concept of that, the idea of that yeah, it's good to read the news or look at the news or however you take it in, but to assume that that is the whole story is wrong. There is a bigger story going on, that if you only listen to the media, if you only watch certain, feeds on social media, you're going to think that we're all losing and everything is destroyed and broken. But if you open your heart and your mind to hear the whole story from, sources of good and light and hope and positive places, and you round the story out, then you're reminded that we're living in one of the greatest moments of human history ever. And that, I read an article the other day that talked about the people that live in the wealthiest countries think the world is in a terrible state,
Right.
and people that live in the poorer, more developing countries, they think life's better than it's ever been. And so a lot of it's a matter of perspective and progress and your life situation and what's in your heart. And so I try to, not only balance it out, but make sure that I'm not allowing one narrative, particularly a dark narrative, to take over my heart space.
How do you do? But again, practically. So I'm reading
Oh,
Johan Hari's Stolen Focus, uh,
yeah.
which is basically the how the insidiousness and how it's just everywhere. There's no way to get away from other people's agendas for your attention. How do you
Mm.
actually do that for yourself? Because you're on social media. Like, it's
Yeah.
not like
Yeah.
I went to post something today, got lost for 15 minutes. Right.
Yeah.
I would love to
Yeah.
be a creator and just walk away, and my ADD doesn't allow that. How do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, I have chosen the places that I am going to put my heart on a regular basis, that I know what the sense of that is going to be. So, for example, I mean, my family has routines about our spiritual life and our engagement with our church community, whether that's a formal like service, or whether that's just community group. I mean, we host a community group in our home twice every other week, where people come to our home, and for 3 hours we sit and talk about life.
Mm.
And I lead those meetings, I moderate those meetings, and I do it in a very specific way, where we are engaging together to find the light, to find the hope, to to grow and pursue growth, not to wallow in the mud. Because most of what people want to talk about, and what we do talk about to start with, are the ugly things. Let me tell you what happened at work this week. Let me tell you what's going on with my teenager. Let me tell you what's whatever. And then then the issue becomes, well, where do we find the light in that? How do we find it? How do we embrace it and affirm it? And then how do we lift it up and celebrate it together and see the movement of the good going on here? And we have to make an intentional effort. And it's my job as the moderator of those discussions to be intentional, to see the light in the darkness of that story. And for us to be able to celebrate and to believe that, yeah, we're going to revisit this story 3 months from now, and we're going to see the good that came out. we're going to come back to it and be reminded of that good and not forget it. And I think gratitude is a huge part of that as well. I mean, sitting down, I mean, that may be a cliche, but sitting down and taking stock of what's good and what's right and what's beautiful in your life and the journey of, the things that you prayed for and hoped for 2 years ago that came true. Don't forget to acknowledge and celebrate that. We're terrible celebrators. I mean, I think the past 2 years has stolen a lot of our ability to celebrate, really. And so, we're able to see, we can see the slow slide into doom, but we forget the slow climb into growth. And I think that needs to be appreciated and celebrated.
What I hear in that is that Brett Culp isn't just naturally a sunny guy. And I say this all the time. I'm kind of naturally Eeyore. I'm
Yeah,
kind of naturally just kind of grumpy. I'm an addict. I have destructive tendencies that have followed me for the decades that I've been sober. And I get up every morning, I get on my cushion, I journal, I do gratitude, right? I pray, meditate, do all those things to clean the pipes so that I can be the guy who shows up in the world that people say, "Oh, how are you so zen?" Right? So, for
that's
what I
right.
hear from you saying is this is a deliberate thing. The world is trying to get our attention. The world is trying, and not for, I hate to say the world's out to get us, but
Yes,
generally, media, the things that are our inputs are trying to get our attention, get our money, get our control, right? Like you said. And we have to
yes.
deliberately decide to live a different life, deliberately take our attention. It's not going to happen passively, right?
No, that's exactly right. I think, I am a very emotional person. I am very much a person that's about stories and storytelling. And I
Oh,
can get in
haven't
my
noticed, dude, really. Yeah.
yeah, right. And I can choose to write whatever story in my head I want about anything. I if you're just listening to this, you can't see it, but Mark, you can see it. I've got 8 stitches above my eyebrow here right now. I don't know if you can see it
Yeah,
there
no, now
in
I
the
can.
call,
Yeah.
but yeah, yeah. And that happened because the other night, in the middle of the night, I took a tumble in my bathroom and my face broke the fall. And in the middle of the night, I was bleeding and my wife was out of town because she was at like a girls' weekend thing. And I had to get my 17-year-old son up in the middle of the night and have him drive me to the hospital and all that stuff to get stitches. And, but here I was, in the middle of the night, I'm alone in my bedroom, in my bathroom. My wife's not there. I'm laying on the floor. I feel like I've like like I think maybe I passed out for a minute. I'm not sure, but it's dark in the room. I turn on the light. I'm covered in blood. It's like a scene from like a movie where, it's like you wake up in a hotel room covered in blood and there's what's happened. And I don't have my glasses on, so I can't see. And, all these things. And it was so easy for me in that moment to create a narrative of doom, of sadness, of loneliness, of heartbreak, of what has happened to me, and I can't believe where I am right now, and I'm so and there was no adults around to straighten that story out for me. I'm trying to call my wife, she's got her phone on silent, she's not hearing it. I call my dad, he's not picking up. All I've got is my 17-year-old son, and I'm having to manage the situation for him. But
Right.
in my heart, in my head, it's very difficult for me to maintain control of a hopeful narrative of where this was headed and what had just happened to me and why it was okay and why this wasn't a trauma that was going to destroy me and break my heart because I'm such a diva about these kind of things. I'm so and it was interesting in that situation. I held it together and then finally got a good friend on the phone at about 8 a.m. And when she picked up the phone and just said hello, I just
uh,
lost it. Like I just completely, all of this that I was holding, trying to shape this narrative for myself, it all like crumbled around me. And I needed her to help me sort of reassemble it for myself. And I I tell that story. I mean, that story comes out of me in this moment because I think we are in a moment where we're surrounded by difficult stories, heavy things that are hard for us to process. I think it's now more important than ever that we choose the narratives for ourselves, for our families, and our communities, and that we rally together to support each other in those positive, hopeful, beautiful narratives of where we are going together. And that is difficult to do, um, but I think it's essential. And I actually think right now it's the core work of leadership. Right now, I think some people think that the most important thing about leadership right now is innovation, or it's about change management, or it's about um, empowering others, and that's those things are true and important. But to me, the Napoleon quote, "Leaders are dealers in hope," has become such an important quote to me. That idea of
Mm.
leaders are dealers in hope, that the greatest gift we can give is to hold space for possibility, for hope within each other and within the world. And I think that's super important right
It is super important, and I'm hoping it's, I see pockets. That's what I do. I am in glass buildings all day teaching leadership, and
now.
I'm hoping some of that is getting through. But like there's a lot of noise. I want to go back to you being a bit of a diva,
Yeah.
and having a hard time with what happened. What I've noticed when I first really dove deep into kind of my Zen spiritual practice, uh, I have a couple of friends and a couple teachers who are, just connected to source. Just that's what comes through them.
Yeah.
They're the bulb, the light comes through them, just like you were saying. And what I noticed for a couple of years where they were emotional people.
Yeah.
When they were mad, they were ferocious. When they were loving, they were, you just felt, wrapped in that love. When they were scared, they were scared. And I couldn't reconcile for myself. I thought if you were Zen, if you had source, you were, just basically one frequency. And
Yep.
what I learned was the access to that open heart means the access to fear, means the access to anger, means the access to all the gamut of all that. And you're going to feel all those things and experience them fully if you're fully alive. And that's what I just heard you say is, what I experience of you is that open heartedness, that love, right? That care that just comes through a computer screen to everybody that you touch. But in order for you to be that, you have to allow yourself all these other parts of yourself.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that work of keeping your heart open when what would be easier to do is to shut down pieces of it so that you can sort of medicate yourself and feel better. I mean, that's the easy thing to do.
Right.
And we are living in a society where it's easier than ever to medicate yourself, not just with drugs and alcohol, but with Netflix, with video games, with pornography, with relationships, with Tinder, with whatever you want to do to distract yourself from the heavy, hard, difficult emotions you're feeling. But the way through the way is never around all of that. It's always through. You can't bypass those feelings, those difficulties. You got to go through the middle of them and feel them. I went through a situation earlier this year where I was working on something, and it was a project that involved several people, and it just didn't go well. Like, it just didn't go well, and I had to sort of disconnect myself from it. And that was really hard for me because I'm a guy that likes to say yes, and for me to then say no was difficult. And I had some very, I'll even call them dark feelings about it. Some anger, some discouragement that didn't go on for like 5 minutes. It went on for some days. And I'm not comfortable with that.
Mm.
Like, that is not easy for me. I live in the range of Mr. Rogers emotions, not this sort of like Incredible Hulk thing. And I I was working with both a therapist and a coach at the same time, or two different aspects of this. And my therapist said to me, "You've got to get more comfortable dealing with the shadow side of yourself."
Mm.
And I didn't like that. Like, I was like, no, that's the part we we avoid. that's the part we don't deal with, or that's the part that we shouldn't deal with. That's the part we almost shame ourselves into pushing down. And this circumstance recently was a reminder to me that no, in fact, some of the greatest growth in life comes from that shadow work, those times when you allow yourself to be angry. There's a verse in the Bible that says, be angry, but do not sin, which means it's not wrong to
Mhm.
be angry. The wrongness is when that anger controls you in a way that is hurtful to others. And there's a distinction. And so to allow myself to feel that and get to the root of, well, why am I feeling that? What's driving me to feel that? And let's feel it fully and get to the root of some truths about me, about this circumstance, about what I want and where I'm going, and all of those things. And sometimes it's those ugly emotions that we don't like, that we want to repress, that are actually the gateways into better self awareness and truth that we hadn't seen before.
Yeah, I went this past spring. I went on my first ayahuasca journey, and
Mm,
for years I've been like, kind of flirting with it, and the internal was a no, it was a no. But I've been seeing so many miracles happen with PTSD, with trauma, with depression,
yeah.
with psychedelics, and because I'm in this world, I'm like, it's time for me to experience it. So I go into it thinking, I have spent years cleaning the pipes. I am Zen Master Flash, man. I have a direct line to God. And, if you look behind me, you just know it because of all the things I have on my shelf. So I go into this thinking, I'm going to finally see the face of God. Uh, it wasn't 5 minutes into it that I descended into a hell of pain that I did not know existed. If you ever read the Bhagavad Gita, um, when Arjuna asks Krishna to see his face, and it's the gnashing teeth and the blood and the gore and the this and that. Uh, that's where I went for 6 hours
Oh,
of
goodness.
absolute, and I thought it was my pain from my trauma, from my past, and all this stuff. And what it turned out to be was the pain I've inflicted on other people. Like
Wow.
I experienced and moved through the pain that I have caused in life by my unconsciousness and by some of my choices. So the next night, we did several nights, and the next night, the shaman says, "Mark, that was brave. You did such good work." I'm like, I can't do this again. He goes,
Yeah.
nobody has two of those hellacious nights ever. Guess who went into hell
You,
the second
you
night?
did. Oh, man.
But here's what was beautiful about, like, I was like, when I came out, I was that was precision surgery, because I had spent so much time covering over the hurt. My Zen Master Flash persona, like kind of caked over the lava with rock,
Yeah.
what was
Yeah.
left there from the past, and it broke it open, so that by the time I was done, I was dancing in the backyard in joy. I had lost
Yeah.
8 pounds in a weekend. um but when we talk about that whole, what is underneath here, what is the fullness of the human experience, so that you can be open-hearted and be truthful in your open-heartedness. It's a beautiful thing that you shared, and I'm so glad that you're okay enough to be real, right?
Yeah.
To
Yeah.
give, because
Yeah.
your whole job is to get on stage and be Mr. Rogers, right?
That's
So
right.
and you
That's
say, I
right.
have these dark things.
Yes. Well, you know what? The interesting thing is that, I mean, I've made these films, and particularly the first two films, they are very hopeful, inspiring films. Well, all three of them are. But all of the stories in those films start in dark places. They start in very dark places. And then what the story does is it finds this little fragment of light that gets through, and what I'm then trying to do as a filmmaker is magnify that.
Mm,
And that's why, for me, ironically, my first documentary film, Legends of the Night, is about Batman. I mean, Batman is kind of the heart of it. I mean, the reality is Batman is a pretty dark character. I mean, you wouldn't think that someone of my energy type would be such a Batman fan. You know, maybe Superman or Wonder Woman or Captain America or someone with bright colors, and or maybe I'd love the Batman 1966, you know, Adam West and Powell Baps, you know, all that pop art stuff. But no, I mean, there is something in me that is very drawn to the dark of that, because at its core, Batman is a story about someone who is beyond belief broken, a person
Hmm.
who has every reason in that brokenness to evacuate themselves from the world, and has the wealth and money to protect themselves and insulate themselves. I mean, this guy could just sit at home eating Doritos, drinking margaritas, surrounded by supermodels, playing Grand Theft Auto all day. I mean, but he doesn't. He does the opposite. And and I think that oftentimes it is the suffering that is the path to freedom. You know, we suffer to surrender. And and that's what I always find, is that so often to find the real light, the true light, the world changing light, the self changing light, we have to go through that sense of destructive darkness first to see the truth, so that we can then be our freest, truest, most whole self. And that's what I hear you describing, which is it's the fire of purification that you go through to heal and to be renewed.
Yeah, it's the hero's journey that's in every bit of literature ever, only ever, right? So
Yes.
rising from the ashes. So just want to shift gears just a little bit because I don't want to keep you too long. So you've been traveling around the country, right?
Yeah.
You're now back out on stages. I am now your protege because I have been in so many cities now doing my talk.
I
But
love it.
and again, you've helped me with this tremendously. But you're meeting people. We're somewhat on the other side of COVID,
Yeah.
and all that kind of. What are you finding people are dealing with? What are you finding is in the psyche of the people you're meeting?
People are struggling. They're struggling. And you know, we've always struggled. But this, whatever we want to call this era of our cultural time together in the Western world, um, it's heavy. And I am seeing more, you know, as I stand on stage and share these stories, you know, some of the stories I'm sharing are about other people that I've captured in my films, and what it was like for me to interact with them while I was filming them. And some of them are my own stories of heavy experiences I've been through in my filmmaking journeys. The number of people in my audiences now that are in those kind of heavier, more emotional moments, just sitting stunned, like it's almost like they've been avoiding these
Mm.
feelings and pushing on. And I've essentially like, no, I've kind of trapped you in this ballroom here for an hour, and we're gonna sit in some of this, you know. And sometimes I feel bad, like it's like, oh, you came for an inspirational talk, and now, you know, we're going through these feelings together. And I experience the feelings every time. I mean, that's the strange crucifixion for me, is that I had uh, there's a couple of young people that I'm real close to the young people at our church, and I gave a speech a few months ago in here locally in Tampa where I live, and I invited several of them and their parents to come. It was a corporate event, but I got permission for them to just sit in a little area and watch. And an 11-year-old kid said to me afterwards, during that last story, you cried. How many times have you told that story? And I said, hundreds. And he said, do you cry every time you tell it? And I said, every time.
Mm.
He said, is that like a performance? And I said, no, it isn't. I go back to that place every time. That is my sacrifice for the audience, is that I injure myself every speech for them, so that they can be opened up to enter that place with me. And in that way, it is sort of a crucifixion, um, you know, every time I speak. But I am seeing more reaction to that than I've ever seen before. And I'm standing in the hallways or the lobbies afterwards and having people just hug me for long seconds, um, and share stories of things they've been through and over the past few years, and really that are unresolved traumas for them
Hmm.
that they don't even know what to do with. Um, and now trying to be strong and move forward, because very often I'm speaking to people in leadership, management, executive roles. And now they have to be the strong one to guide the path forward. And they're not sure at the end of the day they're okay. And in the midst of all that, everything's changing. The workplace is changing. We're trying to figure out what remote work from home is really going to land in. People are burning out, leaving their jobs, demanding new things from their bosses. And, these managers and leaders are really struggling to catch up and to stay ahead of those curves as they watch people that they thought were going to be lifers in their organization just quit. And so it's an unsettling time in our families, in our neighborhoods, in our workplaces. And I think we got a little ways to go before we get back to some people call the next normal, but I just would even say some sense of settledness, that
Yeah.
we know what to expect from ourselves and from each other.
I interviewed a friend of mine, Vicky Shillington, who's also an executive coach, and she had the three stages of a crisis. So we went through it at the beginning of COVID.
Yeah.
And she said, there's the shock, there's, the endurance, right? And then there's the new normal. So I had her on
Yeah.
again and I said, Vicky, we haven't gotten to the new normal yet.
Right.
Like,
That's
like
right.
there's no ground for us to call a new normal yet because it's still shifting. And I'm practiced at being okay with uncertainty, right? Like I've made that a part of my practice.
Yeah.
Most people can't deal with the fact that we don't know what the hell's happening.
That's right.
So it's tough. So what's the hope that you leave people with? Because I'm sure you don't leave people broken open in your
No,
talk. What is the hope that you leave
no,
people with?
no. The hope is this, and it is in this analogy. So when I was working on and I don't always share this story, but I'm finding myself sharing it more and more. When a few years ago I did a documentary series for the United States Navy. It was the 100th anniversary of naval aviation. Like Top Gun. We just saw the new Top Gun movie, right? And it's the aircraft carriers and all that. And I was interviewing a naval aviator, and he started talking about this number 767, which is Mach 1, which is the speed to break the sound barrier. And he told me that for decades, the aviators and engineers thought it was impossible to break through. And the reason was because as they got close to it, as they approached, the plane would just rattle, shake, and it felt like the bolts were just going to fly off and everything was feeling like it was going to fall apart. And even when they get to like 765, 766, I mean, it just got worse and worse and worse and worse. But then that moment came where somebody was brave enough to push forward and hit 767. And all of a sudden, everything got smooth. Like everything went calm, everything went still. Because what happened was all of a sudden they had broken through a barrier, and now the air, instead of pushing against it, was pushing for it. It was pushing it forward. And I think that's what's going on right now. I don't know whether we're at 764 or 765 or 766, but we're so I still believe we're on the verge of breaking the sound barrier. I think we're at the verge of hitting Mach 1. I think we're going to look back 15 years from now and look at this moment and this
Mm.
era and say, wow, look at the breakthroughs. That was amazing. Super painful, like horrible. We would have never chosen that. I mean, it's like your experience that you talked about, with your ayahuasca experience. I mean, you would never choose to go through that horrendous experience. And yet on the other side is growth, it's freedom. And I, I read something that talked about like every 50 years there's a cultural upheaval that we go through. And this moment is like the 1960s. I mean, if you go back and look at the
Mhm.
1960s, I mean, such a time of upheaval, and everybody thought all of our institutions were being destroyed and everything was wrong and it was broken and it was horrible. And yet we're now sitting here looking at, we can look back and say, wow, we made a lot of progress in that time. A lot of good things happened. And maybe we look back and some things, well, some things got normalized that maybe shouldn't have gotten normalized. Now we're rethinking some things. That's good too. But these moments of issues of gender and culture and race, issues of empowerment and who's empowered and whose voice is heard and who isn't. I mean, those are as much unsettling to our society right now as issues of whether we're going to have beanie weenies at Walmart next week because of supply chain issues.
Right.
I mean, it's all feels like an unraveling of everything. But the things have to be unraveled and feel like they're going to crash apart before you break through, and then the wind is pushing you forward instead of pushing against it. And so, I mean, is that a tactical strategy what I just said? No, but it's a mindset. It's a way of
Right.
thinking. It's a perspective of saying this wind that's in my face that feels like is breaking me apart. This is not the moment to throttle back. That's what they did for decades. They said, oh, it's too much, throttle back. Oh, it's too much, throttle back. No, the leaders, the innovators, the dreamers, the doers, the creators, the influencers, this is not the moment to throttle back. This is the moment to accelerate. This is the moment to lean in and push forward with the belief that, yeah, there will be some missteps, there will be some blind alleys, there will be some regrets, there'll be some wasted investments. All of those things will happen. But at the end of the day, the pursuit of the open skies ahead is the pursuit that is worth going after. And this is a moment for mavericks. And I think there were people that, in the midst of the wreckages, in the midst of the shaking and rattling, are taking those accelerated risks right now. I hope they will. It's like, well, is this the moment to keep all the Bitcoin or sell it? Is this the moment to get out of the market or not? I don't know. Nobody knows. But there's always, in the midst of the wreckage, the room for the dreamers to embrace the new things. And I think when we look at this moment 10 years from now, there are people right now that are making decisions in the midst of all this rubble who 10 years from now, people like me and you will look back and say, why didn't we think of that? Why didn't we do that? That was so obvious. And yet it wasn't, because we were stuck thinking about whether the bolts were going to fly off the plane and whether the wings were going to hold together, that we did not have the stillness and the boldness and the confidence to see what they saw. And the people that are willing to sit calmly in the cockpit, like Tom Cruise Maverick, and go into the acceleration, those are the people that will look back and we'll all say, man, I should have done that. And we should have.
Yeah, it reminds me of mountain biking, right? I can't mountain bike. I will never mountain bike. I just don't have the nerve for it. But if you think about mountain biking, you're gonna crash, right?
Right. Right.
You just got to go. So I that analogy just that filled me with hope. It filled me with experience, over and over and over again that I've had personally. So for you to bring it to a societal change really does feel good. So I love your talk, and I just appreciate your being a bulb so the light can be in the world. I really do. Thanks for being on the show, Brett.
Oh, thanks for having me. We did a lot of yapping, and I don't know what we actually said, but I hope it was good for somebody.
Dude, I am so moved by what you shared and who you are. Again, who you are when you show up is so much more important than what you say.
Uh,
I that's why I wanted you here. So I appreciate that. So I'm going to put your website and how to get to your movies and all that stuff on our show notes so people know how to get to you. What is your website? Just so people who are driving in the car want to go click click click.
of course, it's my name, which is Brett, BRETTCULP. That's P is in paper, BrettCulp.com.
I appreciate it. What's the next city you're going to be speaking in?
Let's see. Oh, that's a good question. I think I'm in Las Vegas coming up. I'm in Corona, California coming up.
Nice.
I am in Detroit coming up, and I think Atlanta too. I don't know. I'd have to look in the next few weeks, but I'm excited to get back into fall. A lot of conferences are starting back up in September, and it's going to be fun.
I just got invited to Quebec in December,
Oh,
and I'm like, Quebec in December? That's cold.
yeah. Why couldn't we do Orlando?
Yeah, but I'm going because the first chocolate croissant I ever had was in Quebec, so I'm definitely going back. Brett, again, thank you for your time and your heart. I appreciate you being here.
Thanks for inviting me, Mark. This was a joy.
To everybody else, I love you a ton. I appreciate your time and attention. Have a great rest of the day. Boom. How was that, sir?
Oh, it was great. It was great. I always feel like I get into these conversations and I just kind of ramble a little bit, but I